Hey, so let's talk about Encanto.
Awesome. Two middle-aged guys.
Two middle-aged guys talking about Encanto.
Encanto.
People are always surprised. I should say a small subset of people are always surprised when we talk about Marvel movies. I remember someone saying, "Wait, that's so weird that you like Marvel movies. Everybody likes Marvel movies."
Yes.
Except Martin Scorsese, but we're not counting him. I would argue that everybody kind of also likes Disney Pixar animated features, right?
Yes.
They're a vital part of our culture, especially we both have kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so our kids watch them, and sometimes they're really boring, like Luca.
I wouldn't call Luca very boring.
Okay.
I enjoyed
mostly
Luca,
boring.
but I would not rank Luca as the highest tier of Pixar film.
Yeah, it's
not up there with Ratatouille.
It's not all the way down with Ratatouille for sure, but no. But Encanto, I really, really loved. I thought it was fantastic,
and I thought it was good. Good plus, right?
Good plus.
Good
okay.
plus. 8 out of 10.
8 out of 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
8 out of 10.
I don't think I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 either.
Mm-hmm.
Coco is still my favorite.
Coco is a 10 out of 10 for me.
Coco, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really love about Encanto is that it is part of the much broader spectrum of South American magic realism fiction. I should say Latin American, because we can include a lot of Mexican stuff in there as well.
Yes, Central America, does quite a bit.
And so you've got it is Colombian, and Colombia is where Gabriel Garcia Marquez comes from, who wrote 100 Years of Solitude, which is like the great granddaddy of magic realism.
It's the Lord of the Rings of magic realism.
Yeah. Well said. And that is something you and I have both not only read and enjoyed, but studied in college academically. I think House of the Spirits is one of my favorite novels of all time. Top 5, easy. And that's Chilean.
Let's define magic realism. I'm going to let you go at this.
Actually, you know what I'm going to do before we get into this?
Oh.
I'm going to do a food heist.
Oh, well.
You excited for this?
We're taking a break. It's like an ad break, except the ad break is for food that we can't eat.
But before we get into our definitions and we begin this discussion of magic realism, it's important for you all to know that there was, at the end of January, a food heist in the Sacramento area where they stole baby formula.
Oh, okay.
And I love this. It happened at a Target, and they found basically they found these people, and they followed them down, and they pulled the car over, and they found in the back a 1-year-old, quote, sitting in a car seat completely surrounded by containers of baby formula. And then retrieved along with them was other items worth more than $5,900. And now when you phrase it that way, it sounds like this isn't really a baby formula heist.
Right.
This is a heist of something else that happened to have baby formula.
Mm-hmm.
But here's where it gets awesome. They had actually, the Target Loss Prevention Team, which I like to imagine they are, commandos that rappel down through skylights.
Mm-hmm.
They had actually been following this couple of thieves for 2 years.
So it's true heist.
True heist.
Yeah.
They had been hitting targets all over the greater Sacramento area, and over the course of 2 years, stole nearly $200,000 worth of baby formula.
Wow. That is one thirsty kid.
Yeah. Well, and the kid in the car, when they got him, was only 1 year old, so they were starting this before. For all I know, they had the kid in order to, deal with their excess baby formula problem. I shouldn't be making fun of a 1-year-old in this story. And so I don't know if this was, this clearly was a baby formula ring that just was like, while we're here, let's take some TVs or whatever. I don't know if that's because they were supplying underprivileged families who needed baby formula. That's the noble version of the story.
Right, yes.
Or if maybe there is some part of baby formula, some chemical component that is very useful in the production of some other chemical substance. I don't know. That would be
Maybe the
a very
comments
cool
will
thriller
know.
plot thing.
Yeah,
Anyway.
you could write a really awesome story if that were the case.
I mean, that's like the modern Breaking Bad meets Raising Arizona, right?
Yeah. We're stealing baby formula because we're going to make drugs out of it. But we still have babies. That sounds actually pretty... sounds pretty dark, actually.
It would be very dark, and I would love it. I would absolutely write that story.
Do you love Raising Arizona?
I like Raising Arizona.
Okay.
It is lesser Coen brothers.
Oh, it counts under the fold for lesser Coen brother.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm not sure. I'd have to watch it again to see if I'd put it under the fold. I definitely wouldn't put it top tier.
What's top tier Coen brothers for you?
Hudsucker Proxy is my top.
Okay.
But I understand that Hudsucker Proxy on a logical level is not as technically competent as something like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which just is more mass appeal, uses music and visuals and just maybe a slightly leveled up sort of way. I mean, they're both fantastic.
Yeah.
Those would be my number 1 and number 2. And I think Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is probably number 1, except in my heart.
Hudsucker Proxy, I used to be my favorite. And now when I went back and watched it, I think it was last year or the year before, it was during pandemic, I realized, this is clearly a learning how to find their voice kind of movie.
It kind of is. I'd agree with that.
That it is, for all the heart that it has, it still is very much a puzzle box of a movie, and you can see the gears turning, which, is literally a motif in the movie, and so that may be purposeful. But compared to some of their later stuff where they really had found their footing and they knew what they were doing and how to do it, I mean, for me, obviously, the dark stuff is where I go.
So what's your number 1 then?
Oh, No Country for Old Men.
Okay, well, yeah.
If there's a movie in the world that rivals Jaws for my affection, it is No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
I'm also a big fan of Fargo, but
Right. Fargo's real good.
The triumvirate, the holy trinity of Coen brothers for me is Fargo and No Country and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Fargo would make... Probably, I would have to admit Fargo is better again. So Hudsucker Proxy is still number 1 in my heart, but now it's down to number 3. And probably beneath No Country for Old Men as well. But above stuff like the dueling divorce attorneys one, which is fun.
Intolerable Cruelty.
But
that one's fun, but it is also definitely lesser Coen brothers.
And
yeah.
Anyway,
the thing about Fargo and the thing that I recognize that for a lot of people it is they like it more than No Country, and it's because Fargo has hope in it.
Levity.
They've got that absolutely wonderful speech right at the end where Frances McDormand is like, "Why are you doing this? You're alive, and it's a beautiful day." And then at the end, she's like, "Hey, good, you got the little 5-cent stamp. Everyone needs the 5-cent stamp." Like, there's hope in it.
Yes.
And No Country has no hope in it whatsoever.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Weren't we going to talk about Encanto?
Yeah, hey, so let's go back to this. Let's talk about magic realism.
Okay.
So magic realism is a distinctly Latin American genre of literature. And it is important to point out that while Brandon and I have read it and love it and studied it, we are not from these cultures, and so we are likely to get stuff wrong. We do have a genuine love for it, though, so we hope that we're trying to be respectful and not be inaccurate in our assessments.
And we will definitely get some things wrong. We're also kind of across the fence from it, right? Magic realism is often defined as literary fiction with fantastical elements, where a lot of what we're doing is the fantasy that occasionally has literary elements. I don't like that dichotomy.
Yeah.
Let's just point that out. I hate that if you go to textbook definitions, they will call magic realism a separate thing from fantasy, and the only excuse they can give is one is literature and one isn't.
Yeah.
And I would call them both under the I accept Margaret Atwood's speculative fiction umbrella as kind of a olive branch given from one side to the other. I would say we're all under this same umbrella, but there is this point to make that there is the literary community is very possessive of magic realism.
Very possessive, and we live in a very long, hundreds of year old literary history that has been trying very hard to separate itself from the fantastical.
Yes.
To the point that, this is something that I think we may have even joked about on this podcast before. Toni Morrison's Beloved is a straight up ghost story.
Yes.
But it doesn't count because it's good, and therefore it can't be genre.
So let's leave that aside.
Yeah, so we're going to leave that aside. One of the things that I do love about magic realism as a genre is that they are trying to tell really good, great stories about people and families in particular. Tends to be, but is not always, a strong theme. And they do not shy away from the fantastical, that they use it as an element of kind of, this is how I'm going to explain this idea or this character or this event that happened. I'm going to bring fantastical stuff into it.
And what makes that different from fantasy, traditional fantasy doing the same thing? And the usual explanation is magic realism does use tropes and literary styling of the realism movement. Of the early 20th century. Like, that's a literary movement. When they say magic realism, they are saying it is part of an offshoot of the realism movement, but it is adding this like everyday magic that is treated as, in some cases it can be spectacular, but it's treated as understood and expected. It's not understood in we understand the mechanics, but understood in this is part of the world and it's just how the world works.
Yeah. It's just a thing that happens. And it's also worth pointing out, while we have already touched on this, that magic realism does come from a distinctly different cultural background from Latin America that has a lot of different touchstones and a lot of different history.
Are you okay then with Encanto being written by someone who wasn't from that culture?
Well, they did have a Colombian woman as one of the directors, and I think as one of the screenwriters.
But the main screenwriter, as I understand, this is them doing the right thing by saying, let's get people from the culture. But the main screenwriter, as I understand, was same screenwriter as Moana, and went and got a director to co-direct with.
This is the story we want to tell, but we don't want to tell it from the outside. We would like you to step in.
Right.
I don't know the full history of how the movie was made and who made it. I personally find it really kind of beautiful and wonderful, and I think it's great. And so I don't have an issue with that. I think that you can definitely watch the progression from Moana to Encanto as they say, we tried to be respectful to a culture, and there were things that we got really wrong.
Right.
Now we're going to be better at it this time. And part
starting
of what they did to be better was, but
maybe not even starting there, starting before there. But
definitely there's a much longer history of that. But
yeah. All right. So magic realism is this distinctly interesting genre where magic is treated as an everyday occurrence, or at least a part of the world that you can expect to happen. And the story is generally not about the magic. In the way that a lot of times my stories, all stories about character, right? But in my stories, the characters are often trying to solve a mystery of the magic. And Encanto is really interesting because you think that might be what it's about, but then you don't get an answer to that at the end.
Yeah.
And that's very magic realism, right? You can interpret, you can give lots of different guesses.
Yeah.
But there's no, we figured out what is wrong with the magic and we fixed it.
Yeah. One of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you is because I watched it and I thought, that ending is not what I expected.
Right.
it's kind of the anti-Brandon ending in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
Because it's, you compare that to Elantris. Both are distinctly about the magic is broken, how do we fix it?
Yeah.
And they kind of ultimately were not interested in exploring the rules and the function of the magic and repairing it so much as the magic is the backdrop of how they tell the story.
People would assume, you wouldn't, but people would assume that I would dislike the movie because of that. They're not understanding that me choosing to write a certain style of fantasy and lean into it is not me saying this is the way that one must write fantasy. It is me saying this is what interests me as a writer and what I feel I'm good at doing. I absolutely love stories that have soft magic systems or don't have answers to the magic system or things like that, as long as the story is well constructed, which this one was, right?
Yeah.
Like the story of Encanto is the magic doesn't matter in a magic realism sort of way because the family is broken and the story is about the family healing.
Yeah.
That's very classic magic realism sort of concept, and it's done very, very well. And of course, once the family is healed, the magic figures itself out.
Yeah. One of the things that I really loved about it is how kind of episodic the movie was, which again goes right back to
100 Years of Solitude.
100 Years of Solitude, and even, like Water for Chocolate, that here is an event that happens, and we understand it in the context of all the other events that happen, but they don't necessarily have to lead to or from each other.
Right.
And so we watch Mirabelle in Encanto kind of going through, and she's like, well, I need to get my sister. I need to repair my relationship with my sister. I need to repair my relationship with my grandmother.
I would say I need to understand my sister, understand my uncle. Like, it's just about understanding. And she does repair one specific relationship with the flower sister.
Yeah.
Like, that one needs to be repaired. But I really think it's understand. Just go understand.
Just go and talk to them, figure out where they're... And, she doesn't actually help them in a lot of cases.
No, she doesn't.
She kind of does with the flower sister, whose name I can't... Is it like Isabel? But
Isabella?
Louisa, the first one, who's really strong, she doesn't actually solve that sister's problem.
Well,
key to it, as wonderful as Louisa's song is about pressure, we don't actually see Louisa being the pillar of the family at all. This is an anxiety she's essentially imposed on herself. It's very
with
tell,
grandma's
don't
help.
show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Grandma is the one who's kind of given everyone anxiety in that family.
No, but here's what I love about that.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm sure others have talked about this, but it's something that I'm watching the movie. Like, it has a really interesting, different structure, like we're talking about. What I love is Disney movies have the I Want song.
Yeah.
Right? This is like a classic trope of the Disney.
Of Broadway in general.
Yeah. The hero and heroine will stand up and say, I want to get beyond the way the waves and sail out.
I want to be part of your world.
I want to be part of your world. And in Encanto, it is a sequence of I Want songs from the different members of the family, as opposed to like the normal structure where the side character sings a song basically about the main character. Like Sebastian sings to Ariel, not here's what Sebastian wants. He sings, here's what you should want, right? Where in this, you go to Louisa and she's like, here's me and my problem and what I want. Yeah. And I really like that as a cool, different take.
It's so cool because Mirabelle does have her I Want song.
Yes.
I think it's actually the most boring song in the movie, but she does have her I Want song, and then she goes to Louisa, and you're right, Louisa sings an I Want song.
Yep.
And Isabel, who I think is the flower sister,
sings
an I Want song. Everyone is basically giving their own version of, well, here's the thing that I want, and here's, and so a lot of it is, like you say, just coming to understand, not necessarily even solving anyone's problem, but just opening those lines of communication.
Yeah.
And that's what fixes everything at the end.
I mean, it's for a writer, it's a really cool movie to experience for that reason. And of course, Lin-Manuel Miranda, we have to mention, is a genius.
Yeah.
And the music is great. And I can tell just because my kids are all singing the music still after watching it.
That's
You
great.
know?
Yeah. One thing I learned is that even though we don't talk about Bruno is the mega hit, it's actually surpassed Let It Go from Frozen in terms of like radio play and stuff.
Uh-huh.
But because of the timing,
Yeah.
this is one of the 1,001 reasons why the Oscars are stupid, why
Yes.
award shows in general are meaningless. You actually have to submit songs from your movie for consideration, and you can only submit a certain number. And at the time, they thought that Dos Oruguitas was going to be the big breakout and the one most likely to win, so they submitted that instead of Bruno. And now Bruno would be a easy shoe-in to win, but it's not even under consideration because award shows are stupid.
Oh, man. Award shows are kind of stupid. Our award, have you heard my award?
You have an award?
This was on my live stream last week, where we joked, as many have before, about George R.R. Martin and J.R.R. Tolkien. And I joked, well, George earned his second R. And, his after releasing this, he was awarded his second R. It's like being knighted by the fantasy community. You get an R, and then if you're really good, you get a second R. And I realized there should be an award that allows you to go by RR. Just like you get to go by Sir or Dame if you get knighted. Once you get this award, you're allowed to put RR.
I love the idea that how many R's you have is like how many Michelin stars a restaurant has.
Yeah.
So,
but it can only
George
go to 2.
is a 2R author.
Yep.
And J.R.R. What's his first name? John? John Ronald Rule Token. He's a 2R author.
I mean, you could also...
Can we hypothesize the eventual existence of a 3R author?
No, I think there's a K before you get to the R's. Because you've got J.K. Rowling.
Okay.
Right. And she got a K, and then you get upgrade to an R, and then you get an RR.
Okay.
Or maybe maybe it's sexist, like the way they do knighting, where you're not a sir. If you're a woman, you get a K instead of an R. I don't know.
So I love this.
Yeah.
What's the voting or judging body that hands out the R's?
Hands out an R. I have no
Is it
idea.
Just you?
Yeah, maybe it's us. Maybe we give R's to people.
Excellent. Well, here I want to give an R. As long as we're in the middle of this.
Yeah.
I'm actually reading a magic realism right now. Called The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Cordova. She was on Writing Excuses actually a few years ago. At FanX, but I don't remember if you were there or not.
I don't either.
So Zoraida's great. This is her new book, and it actually is really fascinating because it is clearly inspired by this grand, legacy of magic realism, but also she's part of the, U.S. fantasy community, and so there's elements of that in there as well. The fantasy is a little more overt, a little more fantasy novel in some ways. Really, absolutely wonderful.
Well, I would likewise recommend one of my favorites, Lucius Shepard, who is not part of the community, though he did live in Central America for a long time. The man who painted the dragon, and I cannot pronounce the dragon's name.
Giraule.
Yes.
Or Giraule.
That's one of my favorites.
And there's a whole series of those, aren't there?
He did had a magic realism phase. Lucius Shepard did. So, anyway, question for you about Encanto.
Okay.
Are you surprised by its success? Because I am.
I'm a little surprised by its success, but only because, as I very rudely alluded to at the beginning, I have not been super thrilled with the Disney Pixar offerings of late. I thought Raya and the Last Dragon was really beautiful to look at and very boring. The story did not click for me at all. I love the characters. Story didn't land.
I had issues with that as well.
I thought Luca was, again, really beautiful, but didn't know what it was doing. And I wonder, because neither of those had music in them, I wonder how much of my reaction is just, well, you didn't have songs.
What did you think of Soul? It had music, not
Soul
songs, but
sort of had, yeah, Soul worked better for me. Soul had that moment at the end that I feel clicked in a way that Luca and Raya never did.
Right. Soul's that moment is Soul's like saving grace, if you would say. Having a message I've never heard from a film that is a legit message that people need to hear, that is about art, being an artist, was really cool for me.
Yeah.
I thought Soul lost its way a little bit in the middle. It's like too many ideas, not knowing which idea to tell, like the body swap and some of these things. So they played it in an interesting way.
It was long. And usually when I think, I always go back to the Roger Ebert quote that no good movie is too long and no bad movie is short enough.
Yeah.
And so if a movie starts to feel long to me, it's usually because the pacing is off and the storytelling is broken. And Soul hit that point.
Yeah. So I would,
which is unfortunate because it did absolutely save itself at the end.
I would agree with you on, if I were going to rank those three, I think I would put Soul, Luca, then Raya. You would do the same. You would just probably have them all a little bit lower than I do.
Yeah, I would definitely put them in that same order. I really wish that I liked Raya more than I do because the world building was beautiful.
Yeah.
But they didn't.
I really liked Awkwafina in it. I seem to just enjoy her in everything I see
everything.
her in. But regardless, Encanto, I am surprised by its success. In that, now I think it's like I said, I think it's an 8 out of 10, right? It's a really good movie, and things like that. But I did not think it would click with like my nieces, like Frozen did. Frozen, I watched Frozen. I'm like, oh yeah, I can girl power, pretty princess and practical princess, but it's not that practical. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The two sisters. You've got cool magic that's the magic you would want to have, which Encanto does have. It also has a bunch that you're like, why would I want that? But it at least has, you get to be friends to all the animals. By the way, you get to hear everyone whispering all the time and can never turn it off. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But
does not sound great.
But regardless, it did have a little bit of that. But Frozen, I was watching, I'm like, oh yeah. And then when it exploded and became the biggest thing ever, there was, you can't guess that something's going to get that big ever. These phenomenon movies or phenomenon books, you can never guess. We've talked about that. But when it happened to Frozen, I'm like, oh yeah, makes perfect sense. It's got a banger of a song at the center of it. It's the first really big Disney subversion of the love at first sight. Protagonist needs to have a love interest story. Great, I understand exactly why it's huge. Encanto, when it did the same thing, I'm like, wow, I would not have pegged the quirky story about a family that's dysfunctional, that's at the end, this resolution is, well, abusive grandma, try to be less abusive. And she's like, okay. And that's your resolution. Being the thing, right? There's no hero's journey. There's no standard storytelling archetypes from traditional archetypes. Looking at traditional Hollywood storytelling, it breaks so many rules. It does not have an ending at all based on many structural models. I do think the music is a huge part of why it's been so successful. Yeah.
Dolores's verse from We Don't Talk About Bruno, that's going to be in my head until I die. Because it's incredibly catchy. But on top of that, I do think that it absolutely stands on its own merits as a really compelling family narrative. And there's very few of those, especially, when we start talking about the grander repertoire of Disney. How many Disney heroines even have parents, let alone an entire family?
Yeah.
And that
I think that's
is
a big deal.
A big thing and a big reason of why I think it hits so strong.
Well, and what's partially interesting also is kind of watching from the outside. It's obvious that Disney didn't understand how big it would be or why it would be big.
Yeah.
You mentioned they submitted the wrong song to the Oscars, right? Emily was telling me, and I don't have a primary source on this because it comes to me secondhand, but Emily was telling me that they completely misfired on which dolls to make, that Louisa was selling out and they didn't think little girls would want Louisa dolls. And lo and behold, that's the one that no one can get a hold of. My niece, who had an Encanto-themed birthday party, she's 16, and 16, not 17 yet. But she's 16, and she's very into it. She's learning to play all the songs on her guitar. She made Encanto food for us. She's seen the movie, 100 times, and things like that. She loves Isabella. Or Isabel, or the Flower Girl, right? Like, that's the one that she's latched onto is, I want that doll. I want that, that character is the one that spoke to me. The character that is trapped in a perfect life and has to pretend that she's perfect when she really doesn't want to live up to these expectations.
Yeah.
And I think maybe part of it is you've got all of these different characters who feel really real, and it doesn't have to just be Mirabelle's story, which it is mostly, but still.
Well, I think that is a key part of the movie's success is that, you watch Little Mermaid and either you identify with her or you don't. And, the older you get, the more you realize that she is completely broken and she is not a role model in any sense.
The more you're like, oh man, I identify with Sebastian so much.
Whereas with Encanto, all of the three core sisters, but many of the other characters as well are incredibly relatable in different ways. And so if you are the person who is holding your family together, then you're like, oh yeah, Louisa. And if you are the person who feels like you have to put on a facade in order to, move through the world, then Isabella. And if you are the person who feels like you can't do anything and nobody takes you seriously, then you're a Mirabelle. And it has that kind of horoscope quality that is really prevalent in, for example, the Hogwarts houses.
Yes.
So there is a thing you can latch onto and identify with, even if it's not the main storyline. And very few movies give you that.
Making the house a character was really a great move as a representation of the family and a representation of location. For this, and I think, we talk about cute side characters. The building has never been a cute side character that I can remember in a Disney film, and it works so wonderfully well in this one. With also it being the character that dies and has to be resurrected is really cool. What do you think about what I said earlier about the abusive grandmother having a redemption arc ?
Well, so first of all, I think it is worth pointing out that the big, mean matriarch of the family is a key component of Encanto. It's a key component of Coco. It's a key component of Like Water for Chocolate. Like, it is there because it is a key part of a lot of Latin culture. And so I just, I love pointing that out to my wife, and she's like, she hadn't even noticed. But yeah, a lot of these things are about the big mean matriarch of the family who's holding everyone together and kind of they're in awe. That's actually also kind of the plot of Orquídea Divina that I mentioned earlier.
I will mention my favorite Reddit comment on a thread about Encanto. Whoever you are, I love this, where they said, the most magical thing about Encanto is that an abuela would admit that she's wrong. And that seemed like somebody who had some experience. But my kind of thing here is, and I totally accept it, I don't think it's a flaw of the movie, right? It's something to talk about, though. Is that, like a lot of films, particularly in this genre, you need to exaggerate in order to make stories work. So you can't just have your uncle get offended. Cousin, right?
Bruno?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was her uncle.
Get offended and, move to the town next door. He has to live in the walls for a decade, sneaking food and pathetically dreaming of eating with his family that he still loves while he breaks apart inside. And the level of that is such a level of mental turmoil and the abuse that led to that when his song is sung and you understand just how mean everyone was to him. Part of me has to just patch that over and be like, look, they have to exaggerate to make a film like this work. In real life, this would be a way more serious issue than you can fix by, holding hands and things like that. But you can argue that in most Disney stories, the world is in a much worse place than one person should be able to fix anyway. It's the same sort of thing. It's no different from Moana putting the heart of the sea back and saving all of the planet, right? Yeah. But it is something that I kind of had to gloss over.
Yeah, well, and Moana's a good example because that has the same thing of, the villain throughout the whole thing is actually a good and wonderful person if we can find a way to relate to her.
Yes.
What saves it for me, maybe save is the wrong word, what makes it work for me is that ultimately Mirabel, it's not a story about Mirabel getting her magic power. That's what you think it is the whole time.
Yeah.
It's actually the story of Mirabel taking her place as the new abuela.
Yeah.
Who also does not have a magic power.
Yep.
And that's never really discussed, but it becomes very obvious by the end that she doesn't have her own magic. Her job is to hold everyone together. That's exactly the situation Mirabel is in. And I kind of wish that there had been a little more of the grandma's point of view. Maybe point of view is the wrong thing, but being able to see from her side, these are the sacrifices that I had to make in order to hold the family together, rather than just, I was traumatized by the death of my husband, so I went overboard.
Yep.
And because that feels like it could have been a really nice moment for Mirabel to get the training of, well, I'm going to take over for you someday, so you're going to teach me everything that I need to do in order to hold this family.
Yeah.
But
the level of kind of sideways abuse to Mirabel from the grandma is also kind of a sticking point to me because, it again, I don't think it's a flaw. It's something to discuss, but it's not, oh, you poor dear, I love you, I'm sorry that you didn't get a power. It is, you are an embarrassment to this family, and whatever you did, I wish you would just vanish.
Which she never says out loud.
No.
But you do kind of get that impression.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that a lot of this doesn't work very well, part of the reason that I think this is an issue is, just like with Louisa, we never see scenes of her being the pillar that holds the family. Right. We never actually know what's wrong with the family. We don't know why Isabel has to marry well in order to keep everyone alive. We don't know why Grandma is so concerned about, maintaining whatever it is she's maintaining, because they're never really at peril of anything. There is the distant violence in the past that's on the other side of the mountains, and that is a very historically accurate Colombian thing. But everyone in town loves them.
Yeah.
They have everything they need. The entire first song is, everyone thinks you're awesome. Let's follow you around and talk about how awesome you are. And so there isn't really a sense of peril that would justify the grandmother's level of zeal.
Yeah. Just the fear that she will be proven wrong, I guess is the wrong phrase. That Mirabel is an example that the grandma is doing something wrong, and the grandma is afraid that that's the case. But that's all, that's me supposing, right? That's one of the wonderful things about this movie is it leaves a lot of room for discussion, because I've heard so many different interpretations of the ending, and none of them are the one you just stated, that which I think is the most obvious one, is that Mirabel is taking the grandmother's place. That's not, like the theories that my niece has discussed about what the ending means and things. It's very different, and I find that really interesting and well done.
Yeah. I really wonder if there was an earlier version of the screenplay that had the violence on the other side of the mountains cross the mountains. And I can see why they didn't go that direction, and I think it was a good decision. But I wonder if we need to protect ourselves from that threat if that was ever made more current and more urgent at some point in the process. And I wonder how that would change it.
Last thoughts?
Final thoughts? We don't talk about Bruno.